Hi everyone, welcome to this easy draw along with me tutorial where I'm going to show you how to make vine patterns or connecting patterns that flow across products and pages so you don't see that obvious repeat block on the page. Many artists wonder why their repeat pattern blocks are so obvious. It's because they haven't learned how to build patterns that flow. So we're going to go through this drawing process that I use to build a foundation of flow underneath my patterns so that no one can figure out where my repeat blocks are unless they're professional repeat pattern designers. Here is one example of the kind of patterns that you can build when you do this flow. It makes it so hard to find your repeat seam. People are wondering where that repeat seam is, and they don't have to think about the pattern block as they look at your work. They just see this beautiful imagery flowing across the product. So let's dive into how to do that. I'm Liz Kohler-Brown. I'm a surface designer and hand letterer who loves helping people find their style and sell their work. This is not a tutorial on how to build a repeat pattern because I already have lessons on that. So you might want to check that out if you've never made a pattern before. This is going to be a little bit more advanced for building that beautiful structure from 0 lines on the page to beautiful sketch that underlies your pattern, so you can see what it takes to build up a pattern that has a hidden repeat seam. So let's dive into it. So let's start out here in Procreate. I have a blank canvas that is 3000 by 3000 pixels. So you can use that same size or any size. I like to typically work with a square for my repeats, but you don't have to. Any whole numbers will work well. 3000 by 3000 is about 10 by 10 inches printed, so you can imagine that this pattern could be printed maximum 10 by 10 inches. So just something to think about if you kind of know what you might do with this pattern later on. So I'm going to go to Chrome and just open up a new browser window and go to Flickr Commons Biodiversity Heritage Library. You can just search on Google Flickr Commons Biodiversity Heritage Library. What I like about this is it's just a lot of old photos. Then at the top of their profile, you're going to find a little search bar. So I'll just do it with you all. So right here, Biodiversity Heritage Library on Flickr. So you have to make sure you're on their Flickr page. So it should say flickr.com. The exact web address is flickr.com/photos/biodiversity heritage library. And then you can click the little search bar here. So don't click the search bar on the top, click the one down here. And that makes you search only their profile. So you're not searching all of Flickr, you're just searching their profile. And I'm just going to type berry. I just want some kind of red berries. I'm going to do a kind of a holiday vibe, so that's what I'm going for. Now be careful of these ads. You don't want to use one of these unless you want to pay for that service. These are the Biodiversity Heritage Library photos. So you can scroll through there. Those are like very summery. I'm going for something a little more wintry. So I'm going to open some of these in a new tab. And then again, you get some ads. So watch out for those if you don't want to pay for the images. These are all going to be free to download. Open in a new tab. So if I see some red berries I like, I'm just going to grab them. I might even be okay with some darker color berries. So you can do the same process using flowers, using anything you want really. Obviously it just depends on what kind of vibe you want, but I'm going for kind of a holiday vibe and I want a vine-like plant. This one's kind of nice. It's got some unusual berries. So sometimes you're going to find something like that and you can screenshot it, of course. I'm opening all these in a new tab. And then I'm going to look at these in a larger view and find the one that really speaks to me. That's more of a summer raspberry look. This one could work. I don't love the leaf shape, so I'm going to skip that one. I like this berry shape and I like this leaf shape, so I might just combine those two. So I'm going to go home button and volume up button to take a screenshot of that little section. I'd like to just get a few things. I like to be able to kind of sample as I'm using my making my repeat pattern, I just like to have the ability to sample. This one's probably one of my favorites. I also love the style of it. So let's grab that one as well, and then we'll decide between the ones that we got. So I never just use one reference image. I try to use several different ones, so we're not copying, even though those are in the Creative Commons. Of course, we don't want to copy those people. So I'm going to swipe up, pull my Photos app over to the left, and pull up those images that I just got. So I'm really loving this one and this one. I might save this for later because I don't want to do such a complex pattern with multiple flowers right now, so let's stick with this one. So that's going to be my reference plant. Now I'm going to build this shape, and I'm going to be using the Everything Bagel brush set, which you can get right below this video as a free download. And we're going to be doing a basic repeat. So let's just start out by deciding where our vine is going to lead. So that's going to stop right here, which as a basic repeat is going to pick up right here. And so if it picks up here, then it has to meet up down here in the same spot. So we're just kind of visually thinking about, and if you've never done a repeat pattern, I'm gonna point you to some of my other videos where we do the basics of a repeat pattern. This might be a little hard to grasp if you've never done a repeat pattern before. So we're basically thinking about how the squares meet. If a line crosses right here, follow your pencil all the way down, it has to cross right here. So try to keep that same angle. We're gonna refine it later, but for now, we just have to make it start somewhere. So if it hits right here, we can go all the way down, make it go that way. If it hits over here, we can make it go down. Why don't we cut across like that? If it hits right here, so it's kind of like a game. You have to figure out if it's hitting on one side, where is it going to meet up on the other side? So go as complex with this as you want. It doesn't have to go on forever and ever. Like that could just end up and be a leaf. That doesn't have to cross all the way across the whole canvas. So you have to kind of decide how complex are we going to get. I recommend starting simple right now and then moving up to more complex stuff later. But you're going to do the same thing with any other elements on your pattern. So let's say, for example, I'm going to get red as my color. Let's say one of these big juicy berries is going to go here, and one is going to go over here. It's off the canvas, right? So if it's off the canvas here, let's just draw the other side of it here. It's not going to be perfect, and we're going to match it up later, but we're just getting a general idea of how this pattern is going to look. So I'm going to space these berries out to be sure we don't have any redundancy in the shapes. Some of them can go over the vines, and we're kind of just thinking about these angles. So if you draw a straight line across your pattern, you don't want to have like berry, berry, berry in a straight line, right? You want to kind of bounce it around. So I might get freehand selection and bounce this one down a little bit, maybe to here, so that it doesn't form a straight line across my pattern. That's another thing that makes your patterns look really stagnant, is if the viewer can just look at it and just draw a line across. I don't even like this. Line, line. See how these are creating lines? We almost created a square, so one of those needs to be adjusted. What if we take this one and put it up here, or something even a little more unusual? It's always a good idea to cross your border as much as you can, because that is one thing that really will hide your repeat seam. And then you're just always thinking about those lines. And as a beginner, you might do a practice where you take a different color on a new layer and draw some lines. If you can draw a line through 3 berries, it might not be a good thing. So maybe we need to grab this berry here and make it so it's not quite so predictable, and maybe we just put it really close to another berry to avoid that line. So write all over your pattern. This is a sketch layer. Make it messy, make it ugly, and we will worry about cleaning it up later. This is all about the architecture under your pattern that nobody ever sees, but it is there and your viewers can perceive it. So I spend a lot of time in this phase. I'm not gonna push too hard on this since you guys are having to watch this video, but you get the point. Spend a lot of time on this phase. Then I'm gonna grab my filler, which is these leaves, which kind of have a larger top part than a bottom. So I'm gonna keep that in mind. And I'm always, if I cross over the border, going to the other side and just drawing it in a little bit. I'll repeat the same process throughout my whole pattern, just filling it up with leaves. So we'll go ahead and speed up the video so you guys can see the finished sketch. So I'm pretty happy with how this looks overall. I'm ready to move my repeat blocks around and see what it looks like from the other repeat vantage point. So let's get a new layer and drag it below our sketch. Get pure white as a color, tap on the layer one time and fill. So we just basically have a white piece of paper. We can merge that with our sketch. So what we have is just a blank white sheet with a sketch on it. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. So we have 4 total. And let's turn on the guides, canvas, drawing guide, edit drawing guide, turn the grid size all the way up, and then tap on one of these layers, tap the move tool, turn on snapping, and let's just snap that baby all the way up until we get those orange bars top to bottom. Then we're going to drag these to the 4 corners. And of course these aren't going to match up perfectly. So now we can merge all these together and start working to match these up better. So this line goes here, just erase a little bit. Actually, it'd be better rather than erasing to just use like a semi-opaque color to just draw over. Just grab that white and just draw over. Back to my green color. Now I can really make this match up. So some of these I got pretty close, but of course it's not perfect. So just gonna go through here, clean these up a little bit. I'll repeat that same process once I feel like this whole pattern is matched up nicely along the seam, fixing any little issues where it just wasn't matched correctly, and then we'll meet up after that. So I feel really good about this pattern. I'm going to go ahead and remove my sketch so that's out of my way. And let's reduce the transparency so we can just see a light version of that sketch. Remove any layers that you don't need anymore. And now I call this the chunky sketch because I don't think a skeleton sketch is great at really conveying the shapes. So what I like to do is get that rough inking brush in the Everything Bagel brush set. And basically we're just thickening up these stems so we can really see the power that the stem has on the page. So just giving those some serious thickness so that the viewer can see, or that we can see, what the viewer is going to see. And that pencil line, it's kind of deceptive because it's so skinny. It doesn't have a lot of power on the page, and then you go through an ink and you're like, oh, that's like a bunch of weird thick lines on the page. So I like to do this as part of the sketch, and I'm never touching the edge. I'm always keeping my work inside the edge and just kind of thickening places. It doesn't have to be super refined or anything like that. I'm just giving it a thickness so I can see what it looks like on the page. I'm doing this all on the same layer. This is literally just a kind of chunky sketch to show me shapes and color, and if I need to go off the edge, I just am going to make a mental note. I'm just going to do this part and I'll finish up that part later. I think you can see how it's just kind of a loose way of showing me what this pattern's going to look like when it's all inked. And you can get as detailed as you want with it. I keep it really rough and loose like this, just as a way to sort of see how this page is going to fill up. You may also start thinking about color a little bit, but at this stage, I just like to get really loose, really chunky, and really see what this whole composition is going to turn out to be in the end. So I'll meet you at the end of that process. So the only thing that's left is things that are touching the edge. So I'm going to merge this with my sketch layer. And you know, if you want to kind of preserve some of your layers, maybe for social media posts later, you might start duplicating some things and making them invisible before you do any merging. Like, this is my master sketch. Maybe I want to, you know, show the process of making this pattern, so I'll save that. Whereas these other two, this ink and then the second sketch layer, I can merge those. You can even rename it if you want and just call it save so that you don't forget that you want to save that, which I have done. Again, repeating those 4 times. We've got 4 total, moving them up into the corners. Our grid's already on, our snapping's already on, so we don't have to repeat that process again. Just tapping that move tool and moving it into place. And same process, different part of the repeat, going through with my loose and chunky shapes, filling in the rest of this pattern before we do a more refined, finalized version. This is also something, you know, sometimes I have client work and they want to see sort of a rough sketch of what something will look like, and I'll do this process either with pattern or lettering. Basically, like, here's how it's basically going to play out in the end. It's going to be a lot more refined, and I'd show a refined example of my finished work and say, you know, this is a rough sketch of what it's going to look like in the end. What do you want to change? So that can be really helpful when you're working with clients as well. So finish up that last piece. I'm pretty happy with this. There's a few areas that I do want to address that just kind of don't make sense. Like, what is going on here? This vine got mixed up. So you can easily get mixed up when you're doing this process, and it just takes a little bit of stepping back. Of course, you can adjust your pattern as you work, but typically you just need to take a little time to figure out, how do I really want this to play out in the end? I'm happy with this, except this area feels a little blank. I feel like I could, if I get a different color, you can see here, I could like draw a path through here, and there's not a lot of other places where I can do that. So I feel like I need to close this up a little bit. And one way to do that would be to rework this leaf. So this is kind of your time to go through your pattern and think, what parts of my pattern are breaking the rules that I set for myself? I set for myself, this is a vine pattern, it's loose and chunky, it's going to have this and that vibe. Which areas are not following that rule? And so what do I need to change? Overall, I'm pretty happy with this, and I'm going to move on to the inking stage. I do ink in pure black because I vectorize all my patterns and turn them into vector patterns in the end. Of course, you don't have to do that, but it is a nice way to make art that's a little bit more sellable because it can be on any size. So we'll put a blog post below to help you understand why that is done in case you're not familiar with vectors. But I'm going to go ahead and make this one semi-transparent, create a new layer, get pure black as my color. And so if you are a raster pattern person and you're like, I am never ever going to do non-raster patterns, then go ahead and just start inking. This is okay to just go ahead and start inking at this stage, and whatever colors and brushes you like to use, go for it. But for me, creating the vector pattern is always part of my process, and that just makes my work more sellable and more accessible to more buyers. So something to think about if you've never done it before. So the first step to that is to isolate things that are different shapes. So berries are going to be one layer. So I've got my berries here, and there are some cases where I'm going to have to maybe cut a piece out of a berry so that I can vectorize it in the way I want to. So just kind of playing around with these shapes as I build this. And then new layer, same idea, but I'm using the vines. I'm creating a vector of the vines rather than the berries. And what I like to do in some of my patterns is sort of separate the vector shapes. So here's a leaf. We don't have to touch the vine, right? It could be like this. It could touch, but it doesn't have to. So you might experiment if you've never made a pattern before, or if you don't like your current patterns, play with different ways of depicting leaves and flowers and shapes and things like that. So I'm going through this process. I'm going to ink every single piece on this page except for things that touch the edge, and then we'll do the exact same process on all of the ones that touch the edge. When I have something that overlaps, almost like block print style, I just create a separation between the two shapes like that, and so that's going to be my leaf under there. So I'll continue the same process until all of these shapes are inked, and then we'll meet up in the vectorization and color process. So now I have all of the inner parts inked, basically anything that isn't touching an edge. And I like to make these little guides on the outside that help me with my vectorization process. So that is my last step. Now I'm gonna group all of those pieces. That's the messy, chunky sketch, the berries, and the leaves. And then I'm gonna duplicate that group, make the first one invisible, and then I can just merge all that stuff. I'm going to turn up the chunky sketch a little bit so it's a little easier to see. Just like we did before, duplicate 4 times, popping these into the edge. So yeah, you end up, when you make a vine pattern or a flowy pattern like this, you end up having to switch your repeat parts a lot, but it's not that big of a deal, right? It's kind of fun to just play with your shapes, and you know, every time you switch the pieces, you get a little bit more flow in your pattern, and for me, that's just totally worth any extra work you might have to do to make that happen. There are times when I don't really want to switch the squares again, and I will just make the pieces as good as I can. Like for example, this piece is touching the edge, so what I'm going to do is just go off the edge like this, fill it in, find the piece on the bottom right here, and then I just tell myself, okay, when we're building the vector, we're gonna have to do a little work to match those up. I'm fine with that. It's kind of just a personal preference thing. Some people like to have their vector shapes perfect before they get them into the app. It just comes down to how you personally like to work. So I'll leave that up to you. And just playing around with adding a few more pieces to this pattern. Doesn't have to be perfect. You can add parts in the vectorization process. Vectorizing doesn't mean you're saying your pattern is done forever. It just means you are putting it into a different kind of digital format that makes it more usable by professional printers and things like that. So I've got all these parts put together. Again, we're going to do these guides here, always putting those guides in the corner. And then I'm going to go ahead and vectorize these. I have a video on this whole process, so I'm not going to repeat it here again. If you've never vectorized anything before, go ahead and check out that video. We'll link it below, and I will meet you up at the end of that vectorization process. Now, in a minute, we're going to dive into building a pattern in Affinity Designer, and I'm not going to show you all the steps for that because I already have another video all about building repeats in Affinity. I also have a free Affinity 101 course to take you through Affinity Designer from the ground up. So you don't have to use Affinity to finish your pattern, but of course, if you want to, you can. So I'm going to just go straight from Procreate and show you the repeat in Affinity, but just know that those videos are on my channel for you if you need a little help with getting to that point. So here we are with our vectorized pattern, and you can see these are vectors. If you double click on them, they get these little dots that allows you to adjust the shapes. The other thing I really love about working with vectors is you can tap on that whole group and change all these berries at once. So you can really play with color quickly. Maybe it's going to be white berries instead of red. You can just totally change up these colors super quickly. This is how I make patterns quickly, is just, you know, build that original shape and then you can super quickly start playing with color. So I want to show you a couple other patterns using this exact same process to create patterns with a flow. So here's another one. The vine goes down the page like this, and I think you can see, because we use that process that has that solid structure, you really can't see where the repeat begins and where it ends. Here you can see the original repeat block, but the flow just continues because we started with that nice structure that just flows all the way down the block and meets on the edge. You can repeat the same process not just with vines, but with flower shapes, with any shape really. This is just a way to give your patterns a lot of flow so that the viewer doesn't look at your patterns and say, oh, there's the repeat, there's exactly where the square is. Instead, it really flows across the page because you planned it with that foundational structure that flows over the block. So remember that if you don't know anything about Affinity Designer and you want to use this same process that I just showed you to create a pattern just like this that is in vector format, so it's better for licensing, you can go ahead and check out my Affinity 101 class. It's right below this video. It's question time. This is the part of the iPad Art Break series videos where I choose a question that you all have asked me in the comments and answer those here in a video. So this one is from Just Mamo, who says, "Hi Liz, thank you so much for this video. How do I remove the fine white line on the edge every time I try to test the pattern?" This is something that so many beginners struggle with, and it kind of depends on what app you're using, but I'm going to use the example of Affinity since I'm going to guess that you are using Affinity Designer. The number one thing to think about is partial pixels. A lot of times people try to export something, like let's say your block is like 500.2 pixels. It needs to be a round number pixel. So if you like create an Instagram reel image and then plop your pattern down and your pattern blocks are not whole pixel numbers, the line is going to show up when you export that file. So go ahead and make your Instagram reel image, plop a pattern down, and then make sure it's a whole number. 300 pixels, 1000 pixels, 2000 pixels, something that's a whole number and not a point something something. That's the first step. I've also found in Affinity that PNG files work a little better. If you're exporting the original pattern block, one thing that I've seen that's very common is having a white line on the edge of the image. That happens all the time, and all you have to do is go to your background square, turn off the stroke, or make the stroke the same color as your background, and it should go away. Now, if that doesn't help, you can email us at help@lizkohlerbrown.com and we will look at your pattern. Just send us your pattern or a screen recording of what you're seeing, and we'll take a look. I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial. Please share your patterns with me, even if it's just a sketch, even if you only got to the sketch part. I would absolutely love to see what you made, so you can tag me on social media at Liz Kohler Brown. And remember, if you want to dive deeper into your pattern making process, I have resources for that here on the channel and on my blog. So you might like the Learn Affinity Designer Easy Repeat Pattern tutorial for beginners, or the Master Art Nouveau Patterns on your iPad video, one of the top favorites on my channel. So I'll see you all next time. Bye.